We've decided to remove you from the estate. That was it. No preamble, no apology, no, we still love you. Just a line delivered like a business transaction over dry salmon and asparagus. My father said it while swirling his scotch, eyes fixed on the fireplace like he was announcing a stock split. Across from me, my mother folded her napkin with surgical precision. Then came the part that snapped something loose in my chest. Everything will go to your brother and his children. I glanced at my wife. I expected confusion, maybe a flicker of anger. But instead, she smiled. Not a full grin, just the satisfied little twitch of someone who'd already heard the punchline. I should have thrown my drink. I should have demanded answers. Instead, I swallowed the molten lump in my throat and asked calmly, "Effective when?" My mother sipped her wine unfazed. "It's already done." There was a clock on the wall, Roman numerals, brass hands. It ticked, slow and smug. I stared at it for 5 full seconds before standing up. "Well," I said, placing my napkin neatly on the table, "I appreciate the hospitality." My father didn't even look up. My mother offered a distant smile, like a hostess sending off a party guest she hadn't liked much anyway. My wife's hand brushed mine under the table, not in comfort, but in silent solidarity with them. I didn't take it. I drove home with the windows down, cold air slicing through the silence. My wife didn't say much, neither did I. But my brain was screaming, not just at the betrayal, but at the quiet calculation behind it. And listen, before we go any further, I want to say something. Over 90% of the people who read or listen to these never hit the subscribe button. If you're one of the few who actually value stories like this, the ones that don't wrap things up with a neat bow, hit it. It fuels the team that helps me bring this to light. And trust me, things are just warming up. Now back to the ride. We got home. She kicked off her shoes, poured herself a glass of wine, and turned on one of those renovation shows she's addicted to. I walked into my study, shut the door, and just stood there for a moment. It wasn't just the inheritance, it was the way they delivered it, like a verdict already passed, no appeal, no room for rebuttal. I went to the bookshelf, pressed the edge of the third shelf, an old mechanism my grandfather had installed back when the house still smelled of pipe tobacco and ink. A section popped out. Inside, a wall safe. The combination was my wedding date. I considered changing it right then and there. I opened it. Inside were files, decades of notes, signed agreements, handwritten memos, the kind of paper trail that builds legacies or buries them. At the bottom, a black folder labeled Phase 2. It had dust on it, not because it had been forgotten, but because I'd promised myself I'd never need it, that I'd never be that son, the one who turns on his own blood. But they'd made the first move, and worse, so had she, because make no mistake, my wife knew. That smile at dinner, that wasn't surprise. That was a victory lap, the same look she gave me when she quietly convinced me to sell my stake in the cabin. "It's too much maintenance," she'd said. Turns out the maintenance was me. I sat down at my desk and opened the folder. Inside, a map of the estate's corporate structure. Names, subsidiaries, a list of shell companies going back to the early 2000s, all legal, all ethical gray, all useful. I had once thought this information was leverage, but now it was oxygen. My phone buzzed, a message from my brother. "Sorry you had to hear it that way. Hope we can still be close." I didn't respond. I just stared at the message until the screen dimmed. They wanted to erase me quietly, like deleting a file on a shared drive. But here's the thing about deletions. They leave traces, logs, metadata, and I've spent the last decade learning how to read the fine print. "How long have you known?" I asked it without looking at her, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The lake house lights had disappeared behind us, and the woods on either side were nothing but black smears through the windshield. Her perfume lingered in the car, jasmine and vetiver, and suddenly it made me nauseous. She didn't deny it. That was the first clue. "They told me months ago," she said softly, as if she were delivering bad news about someone else's dog. "I thought it was best not to upset you." "Right. Like stepping over a landmine and letting someone else find it later is an act of love." She placed her hand on mine. Calm. Practiced. The same move she used when we got pulled over in Montana years ago, and she tried to sweet-talk the cop with that same slow, measured voice. I didn't pull away, but my hand turned to stone. "You're not upset?" she asked, watching my face too carefully. She wanted to gauge the blast radius. I didn't give her one. "I'm fine," I said. "Just processing." Processing was code for recording every word. Because now, sitting next to me wasn't a wife. It was an informant. A smiling face who had looked me in the eye, kissed me goodnight, and co-signed my burial papers behind my back. And I'll say it plainly. This wasn't about money. This was about the soft coup they'd been orchestrating for years, the small decisions, the land sales I hadn't agreed to, the business proxies, the foundation restructuring, bit by bit. They had hollowed me out. But if they thought they'd done it cleanly, they were wrong. When we got home, she went to run a bath, claimed she was emotionally drained. I nodded, offered to pour her a glass of wine. She smiled again, like she thought she'd won something. She had no idea. I went to the study, opened the shelf, unlocked the wall panel. Same safe, same combination. The records inside hadn't moved. Not the deeds, not the letters of agreement, not the duplicate ledgers. And certainly not the manila folder labeled Phase 2. It wasn't just a contingency, it was a blueprint, a quiet counterweight I started sketching years ago when I noticed just how family business decisions were made without my input. When my father started referring to me as sentimental in board meetings. When my brother conveniently landed seats I'd been promised. When my wife said, "Don't rock the boat, it's just how things are." Funny thing about boats, if they're already sinking, rocking them might be your only chance to swim. I placed the folder on the desk, opened it. Inside was a detailed flowchart, ownership structures of every shell company tied to the family estate, tax trails, hidden accounts, donor slush funds disguised as environmental initiatives. And tucked between the pages, one item I almost forgot I had, a notarized agreement from my grandfather written in 1998, giving me special proxy rights over family-held land assets if inheritance conflict arose. It's a vague clause, but vague clauses are gold if you know how to melt them down. I scanned it again, lips tightening. Then I placed it next to a photograph I printed months ago, a photo I'd taken myself using an old trail cam. It showed my wife and my brother standing too close outside the wine cellar at our second property. Her hand was on his chest. His thumb brushed her jaw. Not conclusive, not criminal, but the kind of image that opens more questions than answers. I hadn't looked at it since I printed it, but tonight I needed the reminder. Betrayal isn't always a stabbing. Sometimes it's a smile and a gentle pat on the hand in a car. There was one more item in the safe, a small bronze key. I hadn't touched it in years. It opened a different box at a different location, one my wife didn't know existed, one they all had forgotten about. I took the key, slipped it into my pocket. Upstairs, I heard the tub running, the gentle splash of water. She was humming. Some pop song from the 90s she always played when she was pretending to be carefree. I stared at the Phase 2 folder one last time. Then I slid it back in, locked the safe, and went to the kitchen. Made her tea, chamomile, just how she liked it. When I handed her the cup, she smiled again. "You okay?" I nodded. Better than ever. The first thing I noticed was the trust. It was small, comparatively speaking, but significant. My grandfather set it up when I was 19, told me it was for a rainy day, not a storm. I hadn't touched it in over a decade, just let it sit, grow, collect dust and interest like an old family Bible nobody reads but everyone pretends to revere. Then one morning, I logged in, and the name had changed. My name, gone. In its place, something sterile, something corporate. A custodial transfer, the platform said. Routine, except it wasn't. I called the firm managing the trust. Straight to voicemail. I emailed. Got a bland autoresponder. "We are currently transitioning our client accounts. Please be patient during this period of system migration." Funny timing. That night, while my wife slept 2 feet away, I lay in bed, reviewing statements. One after another. Things clicked. A line of credit closed without notice. A property insurance update I didn't authorize. An estate planning advisory call I was removed from, per family instruction. I knew the game. Death by paper cuts. But these weren't cuts. These were amputations. I called my father's attorney the next morning. His secretary, a woman I'd known since I was 15, answered. "He's traveling," she said. "For 2 weeks?" There was a pause. "Yes." I called again. Different line, different time. Same response. 2 hours later, I got the real message. I was no longer a client. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I just smiled and opened LinkedIn. My brother's profile stared back. New banner image. Big announcement. Proud to oversee the future of the family ventures portfolio. Honored to lead our next chapter in legacy stewardship. That phrase, legacy stewardship, sat in my throat like bile. He'd used it once before, at our grandfather's funeral. While standing next to me at the podium, back then he said it like a compliment. Now it was a lock on a door he thought I'd lost the key to. I drove 3 hours to the county recorder's office, bypassed the website, bypassed the receptionist. I wanted paper. I wanted faces. I wanted the clunk of a rubber stamp and the sound of someone physically pulling a manila envelope out of a drawer. The woman behind the counter asked for my ID. I handed it over, gave her the parcel number and the name, my grandfather's, then mine. She searched, then paused. "There's a new listing," she said slowly, her screen reflecting in her glasses. "The parcel's been transferred." "To who?" She turned the monitor slightly, hesitated, then said it flat. "A shell corporation. Belmar Holdings, LLC." I blinked. "And when did that happen?" She clicked. "Last month." "Who signed off?" She turned the screen fully. The digital form filled the page. And there it was, my wife's signature, next to mine. Only I'd never signed that form. I stared at it, my own name neatly forged. A perfect replica of the way I looped the R. Even the tilt looked right, almost admirable. "She had power of attorney?" the clerk asked, confused. I didn't answer. The fluorescent lights in that office were too bright, like someone was watching me under a microscope. I asked for a printout and left, drove to a rest stop, parked in a corner space facing the trees, rolled down the window, let the wind come in and slap me. The betrayal wasn't new. The new part was realizing how thoroughly they'd choreographed it. This wasn't a messy ambush. It was a ballet, silent, coordinated, and I'd been the stagehand holding the spotlight while they danced me out of my own name. I opened the folder I kept in the glove box. Not the Phase 2 folder that was at home, but another one, thinner, just a few sheets. One was a title document for the family retreat property, the cabin by the water. I flipped it over and stared at the watermark. Then I noticed something I hadn't before. The signature line, under Authorized Party, my name was printed in faint gray, but someone had drawn a tiny X over it, barely visible. My brother's initials were scribbled beside it, the kind of lazy scribble you use when you're sure no one's watching, or when you own the room. My phone buzzed, a message from my wife. "Hey, love, pick up oat milk if you're near a store. XO. I laughed, a dry, cracked laugh that came from somewhere below my lungs. I texted back. "Sure? Anything else? Maybe a pen to forge more signatures?" 3 dots appeared, then vanished. She never responded. I closed the folder, put the car in drive. They had moved my truss. They had stolen my land. And they had used my wife as the courier. Fine, let them dance. Let them waltz in suits and drink champagne and clink glasses over legacy planning. They thought they'd mapped the whole board. But they forgot one square, one tiny square they'd all stepped over years ago. A signature from a man who wasn't dead yet and hadn't begun to play dirty. I told my wife I had a consulting session in Austin, some bullshit about a tech client expanding their licensing footprint. She barely looked up from her phone. "That's great," she said, scrolling. "Text me your hotel. Love you." I watched her for a beat too long. She didn't notice. At the airport, I didn't pack a carry-on, just a leather satchel with one item inside, a sealed envelope wrapped in black ribbon. Old-fashioned, maybe theatrical, but the kind of presentation that makes lawyers sit straighter in their chairs. I hadn't spoken to Marcus Lang in nearly 12 years. We met in law school. He took the aggressive track, clerked for federal judges, got bored of prestige, and dove into the murky world of estate reversals, shell crackdowns, and whistleblower defense. When people like my parents made shady moves, people like Marcus made sure someone paid for it, quietly and expensively. He met me at a quiet diner, off the freeway. No firm, no tie, just jeans, beard, and a glint in his eye like he already suspected this wasn't a social call. "You look terrible," he said, sliding into the booth. "Appreciate that." We didn't waste time with pleasantries. I handed him the envelope across the table. weighed down by a metal paperweight shaped like a raven. He raised an eyebrow. Ominous. You'll see why. He untied the ribbon, opened the flap, and pulled out the stack. He skimmed the top page, then the second. Halfway through the third, he stopped reading and just stared at me. You've been building this for how long? Years. He leaned back, exhaled hard through his nose. Jesus, man. This is all real. All notarized, witnessed, digitally backed up. Some of the asset trails go offshore. One's tied to a charity that doesn't exist anymore, but the money still moves. He closed the folder carefully. You want to detonate this? No, I said. I want to surgically extract my name from every theft they've wrapped in a bow. I want everything they touched using my signature brought into the light. And I want a legal wall around me before they even know I've moved. He didn't smile, he didn't joke. That's why I chose Marcus. This will hurt them. I know. This might hurt you too. Not if we're precise. He tapped the folder. You've got enough here to name your own terms. But it's going to get messy. I'm not looking for clean. I'm looking for irreversible. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once. All right, he said. I'll have the letters filed by midnight. First wave will hit the banks. Second hits the charities. Third hits the registrar and escrow contacts. You'll get a call from my paralegal with the logins. Do not respond to any calls from your family after this. Wasn't planning to. I paid the bill, left cash. We walked out together. At the curb, he paused. You want me to throw in whistleblower protection too? I looked at him. For who? He nodded toward the envelope. There are at least 4 illegal co-signatures in there. That's corporate fraud, depending on state. I thought about it. My brother, my wife, my mother's perfectly replicated signature in at least 2 places where she wasn't even present. Add it, he nodded again. Tonight then. Tonight. As I walked back to the rental car, my phone buzzed. A text from my wife. Found oat milk? Anything else? I stared at the message, the irony, the normalcy. I typed back, pick up candles. Might be a blackout. She hearted the message. Back at the hotel, I poured a drink from the minibar, sat in the dark, looked at the folder copy I kept on my tablet. Every piece of this puzzle had taken years. Old emails, physical documents misfiled and photocopied, conversations I recorded on my phone when I pretended not to know better. They thought I was quiet because I was weak, but quiet isn't weak, it's preparation. By midnight, the alerts would start, not big ones yet, just subtle anomalies, failed logins, duplicate signatory flags, a flagged conflict of interest on an escrow account someone forgot to cover, nothing explosive, just the tremor before the landslide. At 1:34 a.m. Eastern, a private server in New Haven pinged twice, failed authentication, then flagged what it called a structural inconsistency in the beneficial ownership records of a legacy trust. Specifically, the primary beneficiary, me, had triggered an archival revalidation clause buried in the 1983 trust charter. That clause hadn't been touched in 40 years. No one remembered it existed, except me. I'd found it 6 months ago, hidden inside an appendix titled Contingency Enforcements Upon Silence or Neglect. Buried between some bland jargon about fiduciary refresh cycles was a line my grandfather had written in his own damn words. If the intended successor is excluded without documented misdeed, all previous transfers shall be subject to review and potential reversal. The system they built was old, polished, imposing. But like most old systems, it had holes, little ports no one noticed, legacy permissions no one bothered to clean up, paperwork that looked obsolete but still had legal teeth if you angled the light just right. I was that light. At 1:36 a.m., their attorney, Harold Frisk, a man who once told me I lacked killer instinct, received a level 2 escalation alert from the private bank's automated oversight platform. It said, beneficiary override requested, legal team notification in effect. Harold called my father. No answer. He tried again. Still no answer. So he texted. My mother was the first to react. She got 3 alerts in a row, one from the bank, one from the Family Foundation's regulatory compliance tool, and one from an external monitoring service she didn't even know was still active, set up by my grandfather back when he still thought ethics mattered. Her first call was to my brother. He didn't pick up. He was in the air, headed to Miami, phone off, probably in first class with a whiskey and noise-canceling headphones, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath their empire had just been sawed in half. So she did the next worst thing. She opened the family group chat. The last message in it was from my father 2 days ago, a photo of his bourbon collection with the caption, "Inventory check before winter." Before that, a chain of birthday wishes for my niece, nothing substantial, just the usual fakery. At 1:39 a.m., my mother sent, "Who triggered the beneficiary clause? Does anyone have eyes on Matthew?" My name was mentioned 47 times in the next 10 minutes. Not once by me, just panicked questions, scrambled theories, and a short message from Harold that didn't help. Looks like he had a copy of the original clause, and he used it. That one sent them over the edge. Impossible, those files are sealed. They were sealed after 2004, but what if he has the pre-amendment version? How would he even know about that? Because I listened. Because I remembered. Because while they all obsessed over domination, I obsessed over documentation. At 1:52 a.m., my brother's phone buzzed to life in Miami. He landed, turned it on, and was hit with 30 messages and 14 missed calls. One voicemail from my mother started with, "I told you we should have shredded," before it cut off. At 2:01 a.m., my name was scrubbed from 3 internal directories. My parents didn't realize those deletions were time-stamped and logged in real time. I had access to the dashboard now. Every change, every panicked edit, I watched them try to erase me again, only now the system logged their fingerprints. They were still trying to play Monopoly. I was playing Codebreaker. And the funny part? The door they'd slammed in my face had a side entrance, one they built themselves years ago when they handed me symbolic proxy access for my 50th birthday. For ceremonial purposes only, they said. Just a gesture. Gestures age like wine. Some turn to vinegar. Others, explosives. At 2:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A new message from Marcus. "It's starting. They're panicking. You want to pause it?" I stared at the screen. Paused? They spent years removing me from the picture, pixel by pixel, and now the image was burning because I learned how to hold the match without blinking. I typed back one word. No. Let it run. They walked into the boardroom late. Not fashionably late. Not power move late. Just rattled. My mother's blouse was wrinkled in the back, like she changed in the car. My father's tie was off center. He never ever wore his tie like that. He once sent my brother home from a family gala for showing up without cufflinks. This time, they were off balance. And they knew it. The room went quiet when they entered, not the stiff silence of protocol, but the kind that says someone didn't get the memo. Because I was already seated, at the far end, at his end, same chair my grandfather used to occupy. 7 people sat between us. Board members, trustees, the family attorney who'd aged 20 years overnight, 2 outside observers from the Regulatory Review Committee, thanks to Marcus's earlier filings. My father's eyes locked on mine. He blinked, once. Then he looked at the stack of papers in front of me. I didn't say anything, just tapped the folder once, slow and deliberate. "Let's begin," said the chairwoman. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. She wasn't used to being nervous. My father cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, we'd like to formally address—" I slid the folder across the table. The legal counsel caught it mid-slide, flipped it open, froze. The top page was a copy of the 98 Foundation Bylaw Amendment, not just any version, the one with original ink signatures, notarized, with a certification page that hadn't been scanned or edited since the day it was filed. The clause was plain as day. Upon the 50th birthday of the named successor, if the original founder is deceased, said successor shall hold a permanent voting share regardless of subsequent board changes, familial reassignments, or asset realignments. This vote shall be equal in weight to the founding vote. My father stood straighter. That clause was revoked. The counsel shook his head, slowly. Not according to this. My mother leaned forward, squinting. That's impossible. We had it voided after— No, you amended it, I interrupted calmly. You added conditions for future successors, but you never filed a reversal for existing appointments. You left mine intact. Silence, the kind that echoes. I continued. It sat in your own archive. 3rd shelf, back wall, in a blue file labeled Legacy Structures. You used the wrong color folder. I always knew the originals were red. I turned to my wife, seated 2 seats down. In plain sight, I said. She tried to smile. It didn't land. Her lipstick was cracked. She hadn't reapplied it since breakfast. The legal counsel flipped to the second page. This puts Mr. Harrow in full voting control of the Legacy Trust Division. The amendment hasn't expired, and there are no subsequent overrides. My brother, just arriving via Zoom, hair wet, tie undone, voice trembling, chimed in, "That clause doesn't even matter. The majority of assets have already been reallocated. This is just ceremonial." I lifted a second folder and handed it to the regulatory observers. Those reallocations are under active investigation. Most of them were made under shared power of attorney, but I filed a retroactive conflict of interest claim against one of the co-signers. My mother's mouth opened, closed. I looked at her. "Funny thing about power of attorney," I said. "It becomes real messy when it benefits your own child through a shell company, while the original beneficiary is alive and was never informed." The observers flipped through the folder, brows tightening. The lawyer fidgeted. The board members shifted in their chairs. My father tried again. "This is a family matter. We can settle this privately." "No," I said. "You tried to erase me privately. Now we're correcting it publicly." I turned to the chairwoman. "Motion to freeze all further disbursements and asset transfers until independent audit is complete." The legal counsel hesitated, then nodded. "It's within his rights." My mother's hand curled into a fist. Her knuckles turned white. The vote passed, 6-2. One abstained, my cousin, who looked like she wanted to melt through the floor. I stood up. "Thank you all," I said. "This was productive." My father stared at me. Not with rage, not with fear, with something worse, recognition. He realized he'd built the system, and I had finally learned to play it. As I walked toward the door, my wife called out softly, "We'll talk later." I paused, looked her dead in the eye. "About what? Your performance today?" And then I left them with the truth printed in triplicate, notarized and time-stamped. They'd wanted a ghost son. Instead, they got a shadow they couldn't outrun. She didn't even wait for me to take off my coat. I'd barely stepped through the door when I heard her voice, sharp, high-pitched, slicing through the house like a thrown wine glass. "Why didn't you tell me about that clause?" The kitchen lights were too bright. The island counter was covered in half-prepped ingredients for a dinner I now knew was for appearances only. Her phone screen lit up on the granite next to a half-cut lemon, messages streaming in, probably her mother, or worse, one of my brother's idiot friends panicking about legal exposure. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door. "You never asked," she stormed closer. "Don't give me that. You let me walk into that meeting. Let me stand there looking like a fool." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so now you're the victim." Interesting pivot. She hesitated, hands on hips, a breath caught between fury and fear. "That clause changes everything," she said. "If I'd known—" "What?" I interrupted. "You'd have warned them, helped them bury it deeper, or used it as leverage for a better seat at their dinner table." That one hit. Her eyes twitched. Then she did what she always did when cornered. She tried to flip the tone. She laughed, lightly, a little too loud. "Come on, you're being dramatic. I was protecting us. Everything I did, every move I made, was about security, our future." I walked past her, slow, opened the drawer in the hall cabinet, pulled out the manila folder I'd prepped the night before. "Right," I said, flipping it open and sliding it across the counter to her. "Let's talk about security." She glanced down, confused, then started reading. It didn't take long. The first page was the revocation of her power of attorney, signed, notarized, time-stamped. The second? Her removal as co-manager from all 3 LLCs tied to our investment properties. No more auto-signature access, no more beneficiary status. I'd spent the week transferring her equity positions into an escrow dispute category. The third was her favorite, a court-stamped notice of marital property freeze pending litigation. She looked up, blinking. "Litigation? You remember the cabin?" I asked. "You said it was too much maintenance. Funny, because I just reviewed the wire trail from that sale. A portion of the funds went into a numbered account in your name, offshore, under your maiden name." She tried to speak. Nothing came out. "So here's how this works," I said, leaning in, voice calm. "You can continue pretending you were a bystander, that you were caught in the middle. But starting tomorrow, any account with joint access is frozen. Any transfer you make will be flagged. Any document you touch will be reviewed because you didn't just help them steal from me, you helped them forge me. She gripped the folder, knuckles white. You think you're the only one who can play this game? She whispered. I smiled. I invented your playbook. She stood there, trembling. You'll ruin both of us. I shrugged. You were fine with ruining one of us. I'm just leveling the odds. She backed toward the hallway, folder still in her hand, like it might explode if she let go. I should call my lawyer, she muttered. You should, I agreed, but use a different phone. The one in your name is already flagged for communications tied to Frisk's office. Not a good look during a conflict of interest audit. Her face went sheet white. Surprised? I asked. I wasn't. You've been sloppy lately. She sat down finally. Couldn't fake it anymore. The glass facade cracked, and I saw it. Not rage, not even regret. Panic. Real, unscripted panic. I loved you, she said quietly. I believe she meant it, in the way one loves a ladder while they're climbing. I looked at her. No venom, no theatrics. No, I said, you used me. I picked up her phone from the counter, swiped to the last message. It was from my brother. Tell him to stop. They're flipping. He's going to ruin everything. I turned the screen to her. You can reply, I said. Tell him he hasn't seen ruin yet. Then I left the room. And this time, she didn't follow. My brother finally cracked at 10:42 the next morning. I was in the garden, pruning back the dead ivy on the south wall, when the call came in. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. He called again. This time I answered. What the hell are you doing? He barked. No hello. No preamble. Just raw, tight-throated panic in a tone I hadn't heard since we were kids, and he locked himself in the barn and couldn't figure out how to get out. I didn't say a word, just tapped the screen, opened my files, and forwarded him an attachment labeled Deed Transfer E37 Reversal, PDF. It wasn't a scan, it wasn't a draft. It was the original document, tangible, notarized, authenticated by the county assessor's office 2 days prior. It bore the unmistakable seal of our grandfather's estate, and it proved beyond all doubt that the land transfer he facilitated, the one he'd proudly taken over for the family's benefit, was fraudulent, coerced under a revoked POA, executed by a shell LLC with a trustee who, by unfortunate coincidence, also turned out to be an old college buddy of his with a background in tax evasion. I included a second document in the email thread, a formal memo addressed to the district attorney's office. Preliminary notification of conflict and concern, the header read, not an accusation, just a nudge, a breadcrumb, enough to ensure it couldn't be buried again. He didn't call back. I assume he was too busy having a complete system failure. Instead, I texted our father, just one line. I didn't erase myself. I erased the part of me that obeyed. Delivered, read, no reply. 3 hours later, Harold Frisk, the family's ironclad attorney, formally resigned via email. The message went to all of us. Short, brutal. Due to emerging conflicts of interest and irregularities in client disclosures, I must withdraw representation effective immediately. Further communications should be directed to independent counsel. No signature, no warmth, just the sound of a rat swimming away from a hole in the hull. And it wasn't just Frisk. I heard from Marcus 20 minutes after, laughing. The accountant blocked their numbers, he said. Didn't even say goodbye. Which one? I asked. Both. The one in Connecticut and the one in Nassau. They're radioactive now. I nodded, not even surprised, because once numbers stop adding up, accountants don't gamble on loyalty, they gamble on distance. I sat in my study that night, lights off, watching the fire burn low in the grate. Outside, frost coated the edges of the windows. The cold front had rolled in early this year. Appropriate, really. They thought the family name would insulate them, that the layers of foundation boards, legacy trusts, and wine-soaked fundraisers would keep them warm through any storm. But warmth only lasts if someone's still feeding the fire. And I'd taken the matches. At 11:11 p.m., my mother sent me an email, no subject, no greeting, just this. We built this family with care. You're tearing it apart. I stared at the screen, thought about responding. Instead, I opened a new message. Addressed it to the 3 major board members of the Family Foundation. Attached 2 things. A forensic audit request prepared by Marcus, and a time-stamped image of my mother's signature next to mine. Dated during a month when I was hospitalized for minor surgery. Proof, not of oversight, of orchestration. As I clicked send, a calendar reminder popped up on my screen. Family Estate Review, next Wednesday, 9 o'clock a.m. I left it, let it sit there like a joke with no punchline, because next Wednesday, there wouldn't be much of a family left to review, not the way they'd designed it, not with me quietly pulling out the nails one by one. At 12:00 a.m., the dam broke. It started with a flagged wire transfer, small enough not to trip alarms on its own. Just a routine pull from the residual trust in Delaware. But the receiving account had been frozen, automatically, quietly, triggered by a pending legal audit request Marcus submitted 3 days earlier, preemptively, strategically. 12 minutes later, the IRS pinged the main family LLC, cross-referencing a misalignment between declared holdings and a newly uncovered offshore trust that bore my father's name and my mother's signature. By 12:17, the public ethics complaint dropped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be. Just a formal entry into the state oversight database referencing potential misuse of donor funds in the family's flagship foundation. Attached, a statement of concern signed by 2 former board members, both of whom had reached out to me in the weeks prior, asking if certain irregularities should be brought to light. One of them said, "We always thought you were the quiet one. Turns out we were just loud enough to miss what mattered." By 12:24, my parents' phones must have been vibrating like jackhammers. Emails, bank alerts, compliance notices, 4 trustee inquiries, a credit freeze notice for my mother, 3 accounts placed in mandatory review. My father finally called at 12:31. I let it ring. Let him feel the weight of silence pressing against every dollar they buried under lies and signatures they thought I couldn't read. He tried again. 2 minutes later, ignored. Then my wife called. Same number as always. Same name on the screen. Catherine. I watched it flash, fade, and flash again from across the room. Ignored. By 12:42 a.m., Marcus sent me a one-line text. "You should be getting thank you cards from the Department of Financial Governance." At 12:47, my mother cracked. A single message. "You've made your point. Please stop." No anger, no defense, just surrender, dressed up as negotiation. I stared at it for a long time, then typed, "This is the will now." No explanation, no threats, no closure, just fact. The will had never been about ink on paper. It had never been about clauses or assets or who sat at what end of the foundation's boardroom table. It was about who remembered what they tried to erase, who could navigate the systems they thought were too complex for someone like me, who learned how to take their version of legacy and write a new one without asking for permission. At 12:58, a final message came in, this time from my brother. "You win, you've destroyed it." I didn't reply, because he was wrong. I hadn't destroyed anything, I'd revealed it. And like any legacy built on illusion, the truth didn't break it. It just turned on the lights. Let them sit in the glow. Let them squint at the mess they made. Let them feel the cold of being shut out from their own fortress. I poured a drink, sat by the window, watched the wind shift. No alarms, no celebration. Just peace, humming like an engine finally turned off. The dining room hadn't changed. Same mahogany table, same gold-rimmed china that was only pulled out for occasions soaked in ritual. But this time, the air didn't smell like celebration. It smelled like polished surfaces and held breath. No one spoke when I walked in. The clink of my shoes on the tile was the only sound until the youngest niece gave a half-hearted, "Hi, Uncle Matt," then shrank behind her tablet like she'd been told not to get involved. My brother wasn't there. Not surprising. Rumor was he was traveling indefinitely, his sudden absence from the family foundation justified with vague PR words like sabbatical and health reprioritization. Translation: radioactive. My mother barely looked up. Her pearls were on but twisted slightly off-center. Her wine stayed full all night. That's how I knew she was shaken. She usually drank when she was mad. But this wasn't anger anymore. This was something quieter. Regret, maybe. Or just humiliation. My father sat at the head of the table. Technically, His plate was untouched, napkin folded on his lap like he was waiting to be excused, and my wife, soon to be ex, sat across the room. No ring, no lipstick, just a pale shade of neutrality and a silence that said she wasn't sure who she was supposed to root for anymore. I waited until the second course to speak, raised my glass. Just water. To legacies, I said. Nobody clinked. A fork scraped a plate. My niece's tablet volume went up a notch before her mother silenced it with a glare. Then my father finally looked at me. Was it worth it? He muttered, not with fire, but fatigue. The voice of a man who'd spent his whole life building a fortress, only to discover the bricks were labeled with someone else's name. I held his gaze and smiled. Ask your phones. He looked down. No one else spoke after that. No toasts, no speeches, no veiled digs disguised as family jokes. I stood up before dessert. Didn't bother with an excuse, just buttoned my jacket, nodded once to no one in particular, and left through the same front door they used to lock behind me when they had foundation matters I wasn't invited to discuss. In the car, I started the engine. My phone buzzed. A single notification slid down the screen. Beneficiary update confirmed. You are now primary. I stared at it. No smile. No laugh. Just the deep, settling click of a lock finally turning in the opposite direction. I didn't drive away immediately. I sat there and looked at that house, this monument to control, tradition, legacy. They thought the will was a document. They were wrong. The will was me. And I'd stopped asking permission.